Hello, thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to the first of our late starting seminar series, but I can think of no better way to kick off the seminar series for this year than Dr. Stanton talking about walking on the shoulders of Gurindji giants as we go into Freedom Day, and as you know, half of our team has gone out to Gurindji. Last year in the seminar series I talked about why we started this series, and it was all on Dr. Sue because she wanted, it's like a salve. She wanted this seminar series to be like a soothing kind of exchange of ideas, and so my name's Catherine Gilby, and I couldn't be prouder to introduce at this minute Dr. Sue Stanton, who's going to demonstrate intergenerational and intercultural knowledge sharing. He's going to kick us off with the seminar series, and I'm just going to hand over to my dear friend.
Thank you, my dear friend and colleague. Wow, what an introduction. Almost feel famous.
You are famous.
But yes, so thank you everyone for being here today. As you'll see, I do make warnings that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are warned that this presentation contains images of deceased persons, and I also give some cultural advice that some articles and expressions contain terms and views that, while once accepted within mainstream Australian culture, may no longer be considered appropriate. But some of it still does the rounds. Anyway, don't be alarmed by this bunch of papers. It's to keep me on track more than anything.
It's uncle, it's allowed.
My Gurindji uncle, senior, is allowed to make those noises. So we'll just wait for Uncle Speedy.
I'll go and try. Yeah, go on.
Okay, thank you, Uncle Speedy. So I was going to say a little bit about housekeeping, which included mobile phones. But yes, you know what's expected. So, and he's going to miss the acknowledgement. Oh no, here he is. I do want to acknowledge, of course, and I'll do another formal acknowledgement within my presentation. But I do want to acknowledge that we're on Kungarakan country today, Kungarakan Wara country, and what a privilege it is to be on Kungarakan country as a Gurindji person as well, and representing my Gurindji family today on this other country. And just a wonderful blending of our heritages, I guess, and Catherine summed it up before in the introduction too. So I send respect and love to all members of the Jack McGuinness family today, who have this shared heritage of Gurindji and Kungarakan. I acknowledge all Gurindji family and Batchelor Institute Gurindji staff here today as well. Now I'll do a more formal introduction. Where am I up to, Brian? So once again, a little bit of me reinstating the fact that my first duty today is to pay homage to all my ancestors, my elders, past and present, all my Gurindji and Kungarakan families throughout Australia and wherever they may be. I especially acknowledge a large group of Gurindji who reside here across the top end, whether in Larrakia country, Darwin or surrounding regions. Once again, big hello to Uncle Speedy McGuinness here today, representing both, but I'm here today for sharing in the Gurindji spirit. I wish to express my deep appreciation to all Aboriginal peoples, families, friends of the region of the Northern Territory, as well as others from various communities represented here, including those who may have come from the Torres Strait Islands. I acknowledge all present and would like to express my respect and send greetings to your families and countries from Gurindji and from those gathered here from the many Aboriginal nations throughout Australia. As well, I acknowledge all other people, staff, students, local residents and visitors to the region. I thank Batchelor Institute and acknowledge the support of the Chair, Pat Anderson, and Batchelor Institute Council, as well as CEO Leon Yateman, for encouraging me with the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of Gurindji descendants, especially those of us who are living far distant from the Gurindji homeland and who may not be able to travel to the homelands for the Freedom Day celebrations. I also extend a big thank you to Karen Reynolds of the Elder Academic Office for all the work she does in preparation and support of this event and the Batchelor Seminar Series in general. Thank you, boss. I'm proud to speak as a descendant of one Gurindji giant. Conscious that I am only one in the wide diaspora of Gurindji people throughout the land that will pause to remember and at the same time celebrate Gurindji survival. I pay homage to all Gurindji family who, through their generosity of spirit, without judgment, without prejudice, continue to share their wisdom, their knowledge and their fighting spirit. The Gurindji spirit spreads far and wide across the land and reaches into the hearts and souls of everybody who has any sense of social justice, fairness and human rights in their being. And here I've put up some images. You may know some of those people from regular contact around the place. Some of them are Gurindji people here. There is one staff member there, but I don't notice him in the room. I'm sure he told me he was going to be here. He's missing in action. But anyway, so I stand here today, proud today, as I acknowledge those Gurindji grandfathers, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, who represented us in the big land rights battle at Wave Hill. And the 2022 theme of Freedom Day Festival has chosen to acknowledge and honour the many strong Gurindji men and women, the Gurindji and other women and their vital contributions at Wave Hill and right up to the present day. I especially personalise this today to acknowledge my Gurindji granny. Uncle Speedy.
Yeah. That's my mother. I didn't know it.
You right?
Yeah.
Okay.
She died just after I was born.
So I'll just go on a little bit about Granny. Thank you, Uncle Speedy. My personal tribute is the dedication of my few words today to my Gurindji granny, Violet Polly Wakelin McGuinness. She was taken from her country as a young child, put into servitude as a maid whilst incarcerated at Carlin Compound in Darwin. She married Jack McGuinness of the Kungarakan and was the mother of 9 children. She lived most of her adult life in Catherine, where she became an important member of the community a strong advocate for community advancement generally, even though she was denied citizenship. She was a tireless worker for the Catherine branch of the Country Women's Association, a really white organisation, we might say, during the 1930s and 40s. And she died at Miley Point, or Darwin Hospital, in October 1954. She never got back to her country. My granny would have been proud of the Gurindji peoples of the district, women, men and children who walked off Wave Station all those years ago, just as I am, and I'm sure as Uncle Speedy is. Now, I guess in most people's minds, those that know a little bit about history, and especially the history of the Wave Hill Walk-Off, would recognise this man, Vincent Lingari. Born at Victoria River Gorge, Northern Territory in 1919, and died at Dagaragu 21st of January 1988, 12 short years after the passing of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, Northern Territory, in 1976. And we'll hear more of Vincent throughout this presentation, or Grandad, as I would say, I would refer to him as. So the next image is another very well-known image of Gough Whitlam, Prime Minister at the time, and handing back some of the soil at Dagaragu into Vincent Lingari's hand, and saying this to him: "I solemnly hand to you these deeds as proof in Australian law that these lands belong to the Gurindji people, and I put into your hands part of the earth as a sign that this land will be the possession of you and your children forever." And Vincent Lingari's response was, "While we want to live on our land our way, let us live happily together as mates. Let us not make it hard for each other. We want to live in a better way together, Aboriginal and white men. Let us not fight over anything. Let us be mates." I'll get back to that picture in a little bit, but it can stay up there for now. It is an image of Vincent Lingari and his wife Blanche, and as I said, today's this year's memorial is dedicated to the women, and as far as I'm concerned, she's one of those sheroes of the Wave Hill Walk-Off. I didn't make that word up, somebody else beat me to that, but yes. So I can't take credit for that one. But just a little bit of background stuff here, a little bit of historical background. Just let me find my place, sorry. Now, these notes I took from another fellow historian who did a whole lot of research and writing a few years back on the whole process of the assimilation and segregation periods that affected people like the Gurindji and others out there on the frontier. And it was written by a woman called Julia Martinez at University of Wollongong. The Limits of Solidarity, the North Australian Workers' Union as Advocate of Aboriginal Assimilation. And it's in a book by Rouse and Nile called The Contesting Assimilation. So in relation to the 1966 walk-off at Wave Hill Station, one needs to make some reflections, especially around whitefellas' attitudes and the idea that Aboriginal workers could or should even be entitled to wages, let alone award wages. It was a radical and sometimes indeed repugnant thought that had been carried over from an earlier time, from at least 40 years before the Wave Hill walk-off. Right back in the 1930s, members of an earlier day North Australian Workers' Union, the NAWU, led by Robert Tupin, I think it's Robert, I'll be corrected if I got the first name wrong, but the other name is right. He held particular views, especially in relation to so-called full-blood Aboriginal workers. Either Aboriginal workers should receive the minimum award wage, thus protecting white labour from cheap competition, or the Aboriginal population should be segregated so as to remove them entirely from the labour market. Tupin proposed that the Aboriginal people, by which he means full-blood Aboriginals, be removed from pastoral stations, and this is what he had to say. If their position is so hopeless that we cannot lift them, then the only thing to do is to segregate them. If they are left to drift and to try to eke out an existence among the white, the same fate will rapidly overcome them in the Northern Territory as in the other states, and it will not be long before they are entirely extinguished as a people. I think that we are bound, for the protection of the white and for blacks themselves, to submit a notion that the blacks could be segregated entirely onto reserves and government institutions and missions. End of quote. While advocating the segregation of so-called full-blood Aboriginal people, the NAWU favoured the assimilation of half-castes. Another colonial administrator of 1930s, 1940s era, the Chief Protector of Aboriginals, a man called Baldwin Spencer, advocated that half-castes be encouraged to mix and marry with full-bloods and so to limit the contamination of the European race. These were the prevailing attitudes of the time. Other memorable quotes of the time include comments about Aboriginal women, and especially in regard to that time when half-caste men were considered as almost eligible or having potential to qualify for application for citizenship, providing they did not associate with the full-blood Aboriginal people, but this was not an automatic process. It was up to the half-caste to prove to the court that they were eligible for exemption in order to avoid prosecution under the Aboriginals Ordinance of 1918. Added to that, Aboriginal people were reminded that citizenship rights were not inalienable, but a privilege, requiring obedience to the rules laid down by the Chief Protector. A lot of things haven't changed. But anyway, back to this. Rules under the ordinance were still in place when I was born, and it meant that I, due to my grandparents and my mother's status as a half-caste, was that I too came under the protection of the Chief Protector. My half-caste status meant I was a ward of the state, identified as part of my mother's dog licence exemption tag. So 1966 is a significant year for me, as it was in 1967 that my birth was registered and I became an Australian citizen. I was 18 years of age. Now I'm going to reveal my age. I met most of the people who I have mentioned in my presentation today in that time. So it was that the 1960s, the plight of full-blood Aboriginal workers remained unchanged, although the North Australian Workers' Union showed some sympathy towards half-caste women. It was deemed that North Australian Workers' Union membership would provide exemption from the provisions of the Aboriginal Ordinance, just like their male counterparts. A very prominent chief protector of Aborigines at the time, a man called Cecil Cook, a character who loomed large in my own family's lives, would not relinquish control of Aboriginal, especially half-caste women's lives. However, he did propose that in special circumstances higher wages might be asked for, but not exceeding £1 per week. Cook and Northern Territory Administrator Abbott spoke strongly in relation to the efficiency of the female half-castes. There are some who are most efficient as cooks and housemaids, and whose conduct is quite good. In my own establishment recently, a half-caste female employee cooked an official dinner for 28 people. So this is around the time my Kungarakanwechi and my Gurindji granny were both incarcerated at Carlin Compound and were part of the colonial cheap labour force in Darwin. I can only wonder if it might have been one of them who had cooked that official dinner for the 28 people. For sure, it would have been someone I know. Today I acknowledge and remember with great respect and love all Aboriginal women who served on the several colonial frontiers across the Northern Territory and Australia-wide. While colonial administrators and the North Australian Workers' Union might have formed some agreements around Aboriginal female workforce and the bringing of them into the white award wage system, however, the women were to be denied Aboriginality and at the same time denied white status. So by 1966, at the Darwin colonial frontier and at Wave Hill, Aboriginal policy had not changed from the 1930s, nor had employment conditions changed, even though the Minister for the Interior at the time, Jack McEwen, referred to a new deal for Aboriginals. That was in February 1939. Fundamentally, nothing had changed by 1966. Okay, so where am I at, Brian? Oh yes, we did see that image of Vincent Lingari and wife Blanche, and as we talked about her being one of the sheroes. The next slide should be about another song that I'm sure people are familiar with. Am I gone out of... Okay, thanks, Brian. And that was the famous From Little Things Big Things Grow. The Kev Carmody and Paul Kelly song. And which resulted as a wages and conditions strike on August 22nd, 1966 at Wakefield Station. Which was owned by Vesties, the Vesties Group, and it culminated in the historic handback at Dargaragu in 1975, which was the image of Gough Whitlam with Grandpa Vincent. Some of the story of the handover at Gurindji lands has now been immortalised in the Paul Kelly Kev Carmody song. 8 years went by, 8 long years of waiting, till one day a tall stranger appeared in the land, and he came with lawyers, and he came with great ceremony, and through Vincent's fingers poured a handful of sand. So from little things, big things grow. From little things, big things grow. The next slide. Some people are forgotten or given less attention, but they play huge roles and mostly contribute quietly. And they also should be remembered or honoured today. And every time we celebrate the Gurindji Freedom Day. And one such person who I remember well, although not Gurindji, is one of the giants of the Gurindji struggle. And that person, here is a small profile of Dexter Daniels. He was a man from, I'll give you that information. As you can see, he lived from 1936 to 1999. Union organiser and political activist, originally from southeast Arnhem Land, grew up at Roper River Mission, now known as Nooka, since 1988. He became president of the Northern Territory Council for Aboriginal Rights in July 1966. And that council was formed in 1961 by Communist Party members Brian Manning and Terry Robertson, who were like-minded as Daniels and held strong vision for Aboriginal equality and sovereignty. Prior to 1966, Daniels was an organiser with the North Australian Workers' Union, which led to him travelling to remote cattle stations such as Wave Hill Station, and where he observed firsthand the rough and inhumane conditions and unjust working arrangements of Aboriginal cattle workers or stockmen. These workers had been excluded from the cattle station industry Northern Territory Award of 1951. Workers did not receive even 1/5 of the awarded minimum of non-Aboriginal pastoral workers. When the Commonwealth Conciliation and Arbitration Commission decided to grant equal pay to male Aboriginal pastoral workers in March 1966, but to delay its effect until December 1968, Daniels decided to take action. Daniels commenced strike action first at Newcastle Water Station, along with Vincent Lingari, Captain Major Mick Rangiari, Pincher Mungari, and union colleagues Nick Pagonis and several of his own countrymen, including Walter Rogers, were all instrumental in the Gurindji strike that followed. This action in turn developed into a petition to the Australian government for a lease to an excision from Wave Hill in 1967. The exciting thing was I was part of all this, and it's so good to just think back to all that activity, even though at the time I was not really conscious of what was going on, and probably not that politically involved at that time, but I know there was all these meetings in our backyard at Charles Street, Stewart Park, Darwin, and it involved all these men and all this union activity. And as I said before, everyone that's mentioned here today were people that we got to meet and sit down with and talk, and they were doing this great work for us mob. The strike and the ensuing protests became emblematic for Aboriginal demands for land. Daniels was a great fighter for Aboriginal rights, and not just in the Northern Territory. He joined forces with people like Paul Coe, Frank Hardy, author of The Unlucky Australians, and later, as I mentioned before, Brian Manning and Terry Robertson of the council, the Northern Territory Council for Aboriginal Rights, as they all joined forces with Daniels to make significant contributions to the struggles for equal pay, land rights and Aboriginal self-determination. According to Brian Manning, in 2011, Brian Manning was one of my mentors, a man who I have a lot of respect for, and I miss him very much. Anyway, according to Mr. Manning, 2011, the Northern Territory Council for Aboriginal Rights had been formed as an Aboriginal pressure group with a majority of traditional Aboriginal people, 75%. The organisation became active, supporting Aboriginal struggles for equality and actions against discrimination. The council's influence convinced the North Australian Workers' Union to take up the case of the Aboriginal workers' wages and conditions on pastoral properties across the Northern Territory. And while Daniels was raising awareness and campaigning in Sydney and Melbourne, he spoke passionately and truthfully. And this is what Dexter had to say. You white Australians have got to shake off your complacency, because we black people are going to fight for the human dignity everyone should have. And at present you are sharing the guilt with the white governments and the companies that oppress us. So now, as we come to the conclusion, this image is what's happening, and right at this very time. Well, it really the official stuff starts tomorrow, but as you realise, there's always some build up to these events, and I'm really excited to know that Batchelor's represented out there this year. And I hope that we maintain our presence out there in future. As far as the elder office and others like Catherine and grad school and that, we're going to make sure August is always dedicated each year to the Gurindji Wave Hill history and the walk off and Freedom Day. So as we celebrate, and I conclude, but my dedication does not stop here. I acknowledge all the spirit and hard work of those Gurindji families who remain solid in their identity, who keep Gurindji stories and histories alive, who cherish and respect all our countrymen and women here, those who celebrate our heritage and history and keep our connection to Kalkarindji and Dagaragu alive and strong. Thank you, Gurindji mob, all the Gurindji warriors, all the Mudpara mob, all the different contributors and freedom fighters of the days that culminated in the historical 1966 movement at Wave Hill. We will never let that story be forgotten about Gurindji people and their struggle for justice and their land at Wattie Creek, which is now known as Dagaragu. Grandfather Vincent said, I've been thinking this been Gurindji country. We've been here a long time, long before the Vesti mob. On behalf of Gurindji descendants, we express our gratitude to all who supported the action at Wave Hill. There were a number of other champions who never deserted Gurindji in their struggle for rights and equality in those early days. People such as Mr. Manning, who I mentioned before, and then and all those with the Northern Territory Council for Aboriginal Rights. Thank you, Mr. Manning, from me. And there are others, like I said, Dexter Daniels and Unionists of the day, including my Kungarakan grandfather, Jack McGuinness, husband of Polly McGuinness, Uncle Speedy's dad, and all other supporters who remain as part of that chapter of Gurindji history. Mr. Jack Phillips, Kerry Gibbs, Mr. Robert Wesley Smith, there's so many that I remembered today, and I think we should all remember. And I think that's that from me. There's no more slides, is there, Brian? So I hope you enjoyed that little bit of a history, sharing that bit of history of the walk-off and some of the characters and people that were involved in it. I really want to thank Brian for helping with us today, and Kelly, and I already thank my boss, Karen. Thanks, Catherine, and all my. Thank you, my husband. He's kind of like Gurindji too. And thank you, David. I know you were late coming in, but I did acknowledge you as part of the Gurindji mix. But so thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for your support of the seminar series. Our next series is scheduled for the 29th of September, the next seminar. And it's Miss Naomi Anstess who should be presenting. She's from a company called Salt Black. And her topic will be the Aboriginal estate, innovating, regulating and unlocking for impact. So hopefully you'll come along to support us on that. And I thank you all for being here today. Go in peace. May the Gurindji spirit be with you all. And the Kungarakan spirit. And I hope you can join us for a light lunch. Thank you.